3,000 years ago, Israel grew from a small cluster of tribes to one of the largest kingdoms in the region under the rule of King David. But their great king, who once slayed a giant, was now old and dying, and another would have to take his place. This video is about the kings who came after David and the brutal stories that happened in this holy land. Stories about gods and wars that you've probably never heard before, but are the key to understanding the entire Bible. David's son Solomon was the first to sit on the throne after he passed away. Not only did King Solomon expand the borders of the kingdom and force the surrounding nations to bring him tribute in the form of silver and gold, but he also fulfilled the vision his father David had for him to build a temple for God in the holy city of Jerusalem. A massive building full of gold, expensive tapestry, and most importantly, the presence of God. The kingdom had never been stronger, but Solomon had a dark secret that was about to change everything. Years ago, God had made a promise to his father David that his descendants would rule the kingdom of Israel forever. But if they did evil in God's eyes, destruction would come upon them. Now, David's son Solomon had taken for himself 700 wives from the surrounding nations and 300 female slaves who he used for his own pleasure. No doubt, these wives helped Solomon secure peace with his neighbors, but he broke peace with God in the process. Solomon's addiction for women had led him to start worshiping the same foreign gods his wives worshipped. He even built shrines on various hills in Israel to worship these gods. The Bible calls these hill shrines high places, and it's because of these things that God sends one of his prophets to tell a man named Jeroboam that God is going to give 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel to him. But Solomon finds out about it and tries to kill Jeroboam. So he flees to Egypt, where an Egyptian pharaoh named Shishak protects him until Solomon dies and his son Rehoboam reigns in his place. But the people don't like their new king because he's working them like slaves. Rehoboam was in Shechem when the people rebelled against him, so he fled to Jerusalem, and all the tribes except Judah made Jeroboam their king. Just like that, the kingdom David had worked so hard to build was now split, and civil war broke out over a new border that had formed, dividing the kingdom in half. The kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south. In order to secure his land, Rehoboam built a series of fortifications in a bunch of cities near the new border. He also was able to hold on to the city of Jerusalem, which contained the holy temple Solomon had built for God. This was a big deal because even though Solomon had rebelled and started worshiping other foreign gods, most of the people still worshipped the God of Israel, who had given them all of this land to begin with. This made King Jeroboam super nervous. He feared that his people would ditch his kingdom and move back to Judah to be near the temple. So he came up with a plan. He built 2 golden calves in these 2 cities here and told the people to worship these idols instead. But then something strange happened. A man of God from Judah crossed this hostile border to deliver a message to Jeroboam, who was worshiping the golden calf at Bethel. Behold, a child, Josiah by name, shall be born to the house of David in Judah, and he's going to burn all of your false priests on these same altars. Suddenly, the altar split in two, and Jeroboam was afraid. The kingdom was starting to destroy itself from the inside out. And so naturally, Israel and Judah's enemies started to attack. The first major attack came from the same Egyptian pharaoh who helped Jeroboam escape from Solomon. He sent his army into Rehoboam's southern kingdom of Judah and took almost all of the precious gold that Solomon had collected over his lifetime. But he didn't stop there. He then sent his troops across the northern border of Judah into the kingdom of Israel, where he paid a visit to his old friend Jeroboam and raided his cities as well. What's crazy is that there are ancient inscriptions outside the Bible that confirm the campaign of Shishak, which you can still see in Egypt today. Thankfully, Shishak was not strong enough to destroy Israel, but he did weaken them quite a bit. which is probably why after Rehoboam died, his son Abijah took 400,000 men and crossed the border between Judah and Israel to Mount Zemarain. Abijah told Jeroboam and his army that God was not on their side because they had stopped worshiping the God of King David. But Jeroboam had twice the number of men that Abijah had, and he took some of these men and set an ambush behind Judah's army. When the army of Judah realized that they were surrounded, they cried out to God for help. And the Bible says that God somehow struck Jeroboam's army, giving Abijah's army the upper hand, and in the process captured the cities of Bethel, Ophrah, and Jeshanah, expanding Judah's northern border from here to here. 500,000 troops from the northern kingdom were killed in the process. Finally, there was peace in the land for 10 years. But Abijah did evil in the eyes of God, just like his dad Rehoboam. And after he died, his son Asa took his place as king of Judah. But Asa was a man who did good in the eyes of God. In fact, he is one of the most interesting kings in the entire Bible. Remember all those altars Solomon had built for the foreign gods his 700 wives worshipped? The Bible says that Asa tore them down and commanded Judah to only worship the God of their fathers. But now his faith was about to be put to the test because a foreign enemy was coming to attack, Zerah and his Ethiopian army. And they had double the men that Judah had, plus 300,000 chariots. First, they took Beersheba and then made their way north to Lachish. But Asa cried out to God for help and sent his tiny army down to meet the Ethiopians at the valley of Maresha. Once again, God struck Judah's enemies, and Asa's army chased the Ethiopians as far as Gerar before they fled back to their home in Africa. Everything was going great for Judah until a new king named Baasha took control of the northern kingdom of Israel. And he wanted the territory that Judah had taken years ago, so he gathered his army and retook the land. Now, if he would have just stopped here at the previous border between Judah and Israel, things might have ended more peacefully, but instead, he crossed the line, literally, and conquered the Judean cities of Geba and Ramah. But instead of asking God for help like he did when the Ethiopians attacked him, Asa took some of the silver and gold that was in God's house and gave it to the king of Syria, Ben-Hadad, to try and bribe him to attack Israel from the north. And it worked. Syria sent its troops to attack multiple cities north of the Sea of Galilee, forcing Baasha to withdraw his armies from their southern campaign in Judah to counter the Syrian attack. This allowed Asa to retake the cities of Geba and Ramah, and then fortify the city of Mizpah to prevent future attacks from the north. Asa must have been pretty happy with his treaty with Syria, but God wasn't. So he sent one of his prophets to tell Asa that the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth to show himself strong on behalf of those whose heart is loyal to him. But you have chose to rely on Syria instead of God, so now there will be wars in the land. Meanwhile, King Baasha, who did evil in the eyes of God, died, and his son Elah became king. Elah sent his commander Omri to make war against the Philistines at the city of Gibbethon. But while his troops were fighting a brutal war, he was partying with his friends in the beautiful city of Tirzah. That is, until he was assassinated by his servant Zimri. When Elah's army heard that their king was killed, they left the battle immediately, returned to Tirzah, and surrounded Zimri, who was inside his new palace. So Zimri lost all hope and burned the palace to the ground while he was still inside. So the people made Omri king, and Omri made a decision that would set the stage for the craziest years in Israel's history. He made a treaty with Phoenicia and sealed the new treaty with a marriage between his son Ahab and the Phoenician princess Jezebel. At this point in the story, northern Israel was still worshiping the golden calves Jeroboam had built years ago. Even though this was against God's will, many of the people viewed the worship of these golden calves as a way for them to worship the God of Israel, since their land didn't have a temple like the one in Jerusalem. But now that Ahab was king, the new queen Jezebel introduced a brand new god to the nation, Baal, the god of thunder. Now all of the northern kingdom was required to worship this new god, and most of them did, but not everyone. In fact, it's around this time that the prophet Elijah challenges the prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel to a duel to see who the true God of Israel really is. And it's in this story that we get a small taste of what Baal worship looked like. The Bible says that people had to start spilling their own blood in order to get this God's attention. What's crazy is that within the last 10 years, archaeologists have found lots of these ancient figurines in the land of Israel that used to be used as idols to worship Baal. While all of this was going on under King Ahab's rule, he gets a terrifying message from an even more wicked king, Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria. Your silver and gold are mine. Your loveliest wives and children are mine. What would you do if an evil king sent this message to you about your family? Surprisingly, King Ahab actually agreed to the king of Syria's request at first. But when Syria asked Israel to give them even more than this, they went to war near their capital in Samaria, and despite Ahab and Jezebel's evil, God gave them victory over Syria. But Syria attacked a second time, this time at Yarmouk and Aphek. And once again, by God's grace, Israel was victorious, but not for long. Meanwhile, there was a new king in Judah, King Jehoshaphat. People really loved this guy. In fact, the Philistines and Arabians respected him so much that they brought him tribute in the form of silver and sheep. But the best part was that Jehoshaphat loved God. His only problem was that he had a soft spot for King Ahab in the north. He wanted to unify the kingdoms, which is why he had his son Jehoram marry Ahab's daughter Athaliah. It's also why he agreed to join Ahab in another battle against the Syrians at Ramoth Gilead. But this time, King Ahab was killed in battle, the Syrians won, and Jehoshaphat had to retreat back to his home in Judah. But now the kingdom of Israel had another problem on their hands. During Ahab's reign over the northern kingdom, the king of Moab paid tribute to Israel. But when Ahab died, Moab stopped paying. So Ahab's son Joram gathered his troops, came down to Jerusalem, asked King Jehoshaphat to join him, and the two armies traveled down to the region of Edom to attack Moab. Even the Edomites joined forces with King Joram. But God gave Israel a promise that he will deliver the Moabites into Israel's hand. But then something really dark happens. Israel, Judah, and Edom start to win the battle just like God said. So the king of Moab takes his eldest son and offers him as a burnt offering on the wall of the Moabite kingdom. But then the Bible says these confusing words. There was great indignation against Israel, so Israel departed from him and returned to their own land. Wait, but I thought God promised to deliver the Moabites to them. So I'm actually looking at the passage right now, and in the past, a passage like this would seem like a contradiction, and I would just be super confused. I'd have to go open up a bunch of different commentaries to try to figure it out. But I'm going to show you guys what I do now when I come across a verse that's hard to understand. I'm going to open up this app that I created called Scripturely, look up the verse, and then find it. And then all I have to do is simply tap on it, and it's going to instantly give me some explanation. So it looks like what happened was when the king sacrificed his son, that Israel was so disgusted and angry that it made them leave. But this still doesn't fully answer my question. So what I'm going to do is dive a little bit deeper. And that's the great thing about Scripturely is if the instant explanation you get doesn't fully answer your question, you can ask it another question. So the first thing I'm going to do is ask about the word indignation in the original language. What I like about this is it's not going to give me some complex answer about the Hebrew language. It's just going to get right to the point. And it looks like it has to do with wrath or anger in the original language. So now I'm going to dig a little bit deeper with a few more questions, and I think we'll have an answer at the end. Wow, so basically what it's saying is that God pretty much laid out the red carpet for them. They were completely winning the battle, but it was their own choice to basically leave God's promise on the table. So it's not that God went back on his promise or that he didn't deliver the Moabites into their hands. It's just that after God handed the Moabites over to Israel and Judah, basically on a silver platter, they just decided to walk away. I've trained the Scripturally AI on all of my favorite, most trusted commentaries. So if you want to try Scripturally out for yourself, you can go to scripturallyapp.com or click the link below to get 25% off on our weekly, monthly, and annual plans. Also, if you've ever had the goal of reading the Bible in 1 year, Scripturally will create a customized plan to help you do that with less than 20 minutes a day. Just scan the QR code or go to scripturallyapp.com. Now that everyone had returned to their own land, a new alliance was forming between Ammon, Moab, and Edom. So the three armies joined forces, crossed the Dead Sea, and made their way toward Jerusalem. This army was massive. So King Jehoshaphat cried out to God, and God responded, "Do not be afraid or dismayed because of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but God's." So the two armies fought at the city of Tekoa, and I think you know how that battle ended. Now after some time had passed, Jehoshaphat died, but his son Jehoram was not like his dad. His son did all kinds of evil, so God allowed the Philistines and the Arabians to raid the land of Judah and take all the wealth that his dad Jehoshaphat had accumulated as king. And after he died, his son Ahaziah reigned in his place. But this new king was about to be replaced by an evil queen. And how it happens is so crazy. Someone seriously needs to turn this next story into a movie. While Ahaziah was ruling Judah, Joram was still ruling over Israel in the north, when one day God told one of his young prophets to take a flask of oil, go to Ramoth Gilead, and pour it on the head of one of the captains of Israel's army, Jehu, and say, "I have anointed you king over Israel." Then give Jehu some very specific instructions on what to do next. After Jehu was anointed, he took his men and headed straight for Jezreel, where the king of Judah was meeting with the king of Israel. But as he approached, he convinced the king's men to follow him instead, and shot King Joram with an arrow. When King Ahaziah of Judah saw what happened, he began to flee to Megiddo. But Jehu and his men pursued him and shot him with an arrow too. Jehu had killed 2 kings in one single day, but he wasn't finished yet. Remember how evil King Ahab and his queen Jezebel were? Well, even though Ahab had died years ago, Jezebel was still alive and just as evil as ever. So Jehu returned to Jezreel and told her own servants to throw her on the ground, which they did, and Jehu trampled her underfoot, went inside her home, ate her food, and then headed down to Samaria to slaughter all of King Ahab and Jezebel's remaining sons, so that no one from his family line could ever take the throne again. Jehu was a guy you seriously did not want to mess with, but he still wasn't finished yet. He sent a message to the prophets of Baal. King Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu will serve him much. He wanted every single prophet of Baal to gather inside the temple that Ahab and Jezebel had built for Baal years ago because he had something special planned for them. These false prophets must have been so excited that the new king seemed to love Baal just as much as they did. Jehu even checked to make sure that there was no one who worshiped the God of Israel inside. Finally, once everyone was there, he told his troops to surround the temple, kill everyone inside, and burn it to the ground. But even though Jehu exterminated one evil queen and her wicked prophets, a new evil queen was now taking over the kingdom of Judah in the south because Jehu had killed her son, Queen Athaliah, Ahaziah's mom. And to make sure that there was no one who would oppose her, she killed all of her own grandsons. Or so she thought. One of the sons had an aunt who hid him somewhere where this evil queen would never think to look, the holy temple of God in Jerusalem. His name was Joash, and he lived hidden inside this golden temple for 6 years. So for the next 6 years, Athaliah ruled the entire kingdom of Judah as queen. Only the priests who raised him knew about his secret, until one day the high priest Jehoiada made a plan to take down the evil queen. There were a bunch of old wooden spears and shields inside the temple that used to belong to King David. So when Joash turned 7 years old, he gave these weapons to his servants and had them surround the temple. Then the high priest had all the people gather at the temple as he put a crown on the head of Joash and shouted, "Long live the king!" Obviously, Queen Athaliah wasn't too happy, so she stormed into the temple, screamed "treason," and tore her own clothes. She was probably expecting her guards to kill Joash, but instead they took her outside and killed her. But unfortunately, as Joash grew older, he began to worship other gods and idols, despite the fact that God had saved his life. Eventually, his own servants conspired to kill Joash, and he died. So his son Amaziah became the new king of Judah. Things weren't so great in the northern kingdom either. Even though Jehu destroyed the Baal worshippers, he still worshipped the golden calves Jeroboam had built long ago. And so did his son Jehoahaz, and so did his son Jehoash. It was just evil king after evil king in Israel. I'm surprised God didn't just wipe them out. At this point, the two kingdoms have been living peacefully with each other, mostly busy trying to fend off attacks and raids from Syria and Edom. King Amaziah was 25 when he became king, and with this recent victory over Edom, he had all the ego a young man could possibly have. So he broke years of peace between the two kingdoms and declared war on northern Israel. The two armies met at Beth Shemesh, and Judah was defeated. But now Israel was angry, so they chased the army of Judah back to Jerusalem and raided the city of its gold and silver. After Israel returned to its land in the north, Amaziah's own people turned on him and assassinated him at Lachish. Despite the evil of the kings of the north, God was still giving them victory after victory over Syria, until finally, under the rule of Jehoash's son, Jeroboam II, the Syrians were defeated as far as Damascus. This was a big deal because this effectively restored the borders that Israel once had under King Solomon. Even the new king of Judah, King Uzziah, had expanded the southern borders back to what they used to be under Solomon. The only problem was that the kingdom was still divided, and King David's ancestors only ruled half the kingdom. But God promised him that they would rule the whole thing. But that was about to change, but not in the way that either side wanted. There was a new enemy in the north, way stronger than Syria or any of the enemies Israel had faced up till this point. A king named Tiglath-Pileser III was starting to unify the warring nations of the north. He was growing an empire called Assyria and was taking control of everything he could get his hands on. Medes, Babylon, Urartu, and Phoenicia came under his control, and he was getting closer and closer to Israel and Syria. So these two former enemies created an alliance, but quickly realized they still didn't have enough strength to defeat the king of Assyria. So they asked the southern kingdom of Judah to join them, but the new king, King Ahaz, refused to help. So Syria and Israel attacked Judah, even forming an alliance with Edom to attack from the south. But not only was Judah getting attacked from the north and the south by Israel and Syria, the Philistines decided this would be the perfect opportunity to take back some of their land as well, which they did, increasing their borders. Judah was in big trouble, but instead of crying out to God for help, King Ahaz took the silver and gold that was still remaining inside the temple of God, gave it to Tiglath-Pileser, and begged the emperor for help. So the Assyrian emperor attacked Damascus, which he was probably going to do anyways. This caused the Syrians to lose their land, and so the northern attacks on Judah stopped. Ahaz saw the power that this Assyrian king had and decided to build a replica of the pagan altar that Tiglath-Pileser worshipped next to the temple in Jerusalem. Then he took all the ritual items from inside the temple and placed them around his new altar to the gods of Assyria. In his mind, the gods of Assyria were clearly giving him more power than the God of Israel. So he shut up the doors of the temple and officially kicked God out of Judah completely. But he couldn't remove God from the heart of his son, who became the next king of Judah after his father died. Hezekiah is one of the most famous kings of Judah because he was born during an extremely challenging time in their history. The Assyrians were terrifying because they didn't just conquer nations, they tortured the people they captured and often sent the majority of new captive nations to mainland Assyria to be brainwashed into the Assyrian culture. People were skinned alive, families were torn apart, and entire cultures were erased from history. By this time, the Assyrian emperor had taken almost all of the land of the northern kingdom, but passed away before he could. This caused the king of northern Israel at the time, Hoshea, to revolt against Assyria. But this was a bad idea. The new Assyrian emperor squashed Hoshea and his armies like a bug and carried the people as slaves to the different parts of Assyria. They also conquered the Philistines, Egypt, and Ethiopia. Assyria was now making its way into Judah, taking over a bunch of cities and completely surrounding Jerusalem. What's crazy is that there are actually records outside the Bible from Assyria that confirm that the Assyrian emperor Sennacherib did just that. God's judgment had come upon Israel and was about to come to Judah next. But Hezekiah loved the Lord and destroyed most of the high places of worship his dad had built for foreign gods. He even reopened God's temple so the people could worship the Lord again. So when he heard that the new emperor of Assyria, Sennacherib, was coming after him, he tore his clothes and went into the temple to beg God to do the impossible. And he did. That night, while Sennacherib's army was outside the walls of Jerusalem getting ready to attack, the angel of the Lord came and single-handedly destroyed 185,000 Assyrians in their sleep. This obviously really freaked out the emperor, so he and his army returned to their capital in Nineveh, and the kingdom of Judah was spared, at least for now. Hezekiah was one of the very few good kings in Judah's history, but unfortunately, his 12-year-old son was about to take over Judah and end all hope for this tiny kingdom. The Bible says that Manasseh was the most evil of all the kings of Judah. He worshipped all the gods of the Assyrians, Baal, as well as others. He even sacrificed some of his own kids to these gods and encouraged the rest of the kingdom of Judah to do the same. But the worst part was that this went on for 55 years. Manasseh was the longest reigning king in Judah, and God had finally had enough of it. But before God brought judgment on Judah, something very important had to happen first. Remember towards the beginning of this video when one of Judah's prophets told Jeroboam, the king of Israel, that God was going to raise up a man who would destroy the altars he had built? Do you remember what his name was? Well, guess who became king after the evil king Manasseh died? His son Josiah. Next to King David, Josiah was the most righteous king the kingdom had ever seen. He destroyed more high places than any king before him and followed the law of God with his whole heart. This is probably why God allowed him to take back much of the land in the north, land that used to be under the rule of his forefathers, King David and Solomon, before the kingdom was split by Jeroboam's rebellion. And just like the prophecy said, he went to Bethel, destroyed the golden calf that has stood there for hundreds of years at this point, killed the pagan priests, and burned their bones on the ashes of the pagan altar. But even though he did so much good, collectively the nation had done so much evil over the years that God had no choice but to punish them. After Josiah passed away, his sons reigned in his place and went back to the evil ways of the kings who came before Josiah. By now, Assyria had been taken over by Babylon, and the current Babylonian emperor at the time was a king named Nebuchadnezzar. The Bible says that the final king of Judah, Zedekiah, tried to rebel against Babylon. So Nebuchadnezzar crushed the rebellion and took the entire nation captive to Babylon, where they lived as slaves. Just like that, the great kingdom that David built had now vanished, and the people were left wondering, what happened to the promise God had made to David that his descendants would sit on his throne and rule this land forever? Most people don't realize this, but King Nebuchadnezzar didn't kill all the kings of Judah. In fact, the Bible says that one of the last kings of Judah, Jehoiachin, was invited to sit at the king's table in Babylon all the days of his life. And hundreds of years later, we learn that one of his descendants was a carpenter born in the same city King David was born in. He too was a king who descended from David, but he wasn't like any of the kings before him. His kingdom was not of this world, and his own people crucified him. But he still showed them grace, just like he did all those years when so many evil kings ruled over this land. And he is still showing them grace, even today, because they are still his chosen people. But one day he will return in power to judge the nation, reclaim the throne of David, and truly fulfill God's promise to rule Israel and the entire world forever. Now you may be wondering how exactly that is going to happen, which is why you should click this video here. See an entire timeline of how these events are going to unfold when Jesus returns for his kingdom.